Hey, it's Austin, and I just wanted to share with you today how I first got inspired to play music. I started playing violin in my school orchestra around middle school, and to be honest, I was really, you know, my parents were dragging my feet to practice all the time, and I just wasn't that interested in the instrument. I was really lucky and blessed to have a family who sent me to, by the time I was in high school, sent me to summer camps where I had some of the most amazing musical experiences and some really inspirational and helpful teachers. At the time, I was also a good academic, a good study. I took great notes at a lot of these music camps. And I'm looking back at them now, years and years of notes that I've saved in my Google Drive and some memories that I have from those camps that I just thought, well, I'd love to share these with folks thinking about going to camps as well. Because for me, coming back from these experiences as a teenager, hearing all these different styles of music and hearing from different perspectives and different teachers from all over the country and all over the world, it just totally changed my relationship to the instrument. And I went from kind of never wanting to take the instrument and never finding the time to take the instrument out of the case to naturally wanting to practice every day and spend hours on it. So just one experience at this a camp like these can really change your entire life, can change your relationship to music as it did for me. And I'm very blessed to be, after years and years of attending many of these camps and taking and learning so much, very blessed to be teaching at many of the same camps that inspired me as a teenager. So I just figured today I'd share with you some of the camps I've been to and talk you through some of the notes I've taken. So thanks for listening. All right, so here's a snapshot of the camps I've attended over these years. You'll see on the top left-hand corner here, I've attended Creative Strings both online and in person. This is Christian Howe's. He puts on a camp basically that during COVID went online, but for many years was a week-long intensive in Columbus, Ohio, and in Asheville, North Carolina. This sort of camp focused on broadly all sorts of different styles and ways of approaching music. It was usually taught by a faculty more than just string players, piano players, guitar players. So I got a really broad understanding of music there. I'll talk more about that later. Strings Without Boundaries here is Julie Lyon Lieberman's camp. I did that one also online. That was a great opportunity to watch replays and work through the sessions at your own pace. But going to Fiddle Hell for many years, that's in Westford, Massachusetts, and it's an entire hotel and more of originally fiddle players, but actually all different instruments: guitar, mandolin, banjo, singing, and cello. All sorts of instrumentalists end up going to that now, and it's just filled with workshops and jams and all sorts of different things. First camp I went to was actually Berklee's week-long camp that was run by Mark O'Connor at the time, and I went to that 2 weeks in a row. That was really what started it all for me. The Wernick method is taught by Pete Wernick. He's the banjo player of the famous bluegrass group Hot Rise, and he developed a method of teaching people to jam on bluegrass music, something I attended myself and now teach that method. Ashokan is one of my all-time favorite places in Beaverkill, New York, and they host music-themed camps of all sorts of types. So they have a Southern week, a Western and swing, Northern week, an old-time, bluegrass, all these week-long intensives that focus on different types of music. So like I said, I'd love to share some of the notes and takeaways I've had from each of these camps. This one is the Old Time Rollick at Ashokan. You'll see a little snapshot here. That's Bruce Molsky there teaching fiddling, and he's one of the people who first taught me to sing and play fiddle at the same time. There's Jay Unger there, and Maggie Shar on the banjo there. So this was a real fun camp. Also where I learned to do some of that flat footing style that you saw there, the dance steps. There's gospel singing, jamming that's happening all throughout the beautiful campus. And there's a kind of old-time style jam there in a circle. You see different instruments there. So like I said, this is at Ashokan, and I've attended several times all sorts of different camps, this one being the Old Time Rollick. I captured some of the common tunes that occur there. and I'll share those with you in just a second. Like I mentioned before, these camps are awesome places to just help get yourself motivated about music again. I find if you're kind of feeling a lull and you're just looking for inspiration, it's a great place to put yourself to get that back in your life. Even if you go and don't attend workshops and just jam, I think it's totally worth it to go to places like this. So here's some of my thoughts on old time music and some of the ways that jamming and the expectations of jamming are a little bit different in this genre than others. I notice in general that the emphasis is on tunes, like fiddle tunes, not as much on songs as in, say, a bluegrass jam. So a lot less transposition involved. You'll also see cross tuning. So players will change the tuning of their instrument from standard G, D, A, E tuning to things like A, E, A, E, probably the next most common one, or A, E, A, C sharp, G, D, G, D. Sometimes they'll tune the top two strings down, or this tuning here where the top string is tuned down and the bottom string's tuned down all the way to D. So this is called cross tuning. Really cool way to play in modal signatures or help with the singing element of it. So you'll notice this is sort of a universal signal to end a tune. You'll see a foot up, usually then people are indicating the end of the song. Often you'll see in old time jams bigger concentric circles, so lots of different circles where the inner circle is kind of the players who are calling tunes and leading them and holding down the groove, but other folks are welcome to join. Oftentimes the melodies are played over and over again, so even if you've never heard them, you can sit in that outer circle and pick up as much as you can from the melody. Usually these, I've found is old time musicians have huge repertoire of tunes, and often they're regional or generational, so folks in the Northeast know a different set of tunes than other areas, and oftentimes tunes are passed from one generation to the next. So I tell people it's a good idea to list the tunes you know in each key. I have actually a list that is mostly updated that I've created here. I wanted to share with you. I've organized my list of repertoire as best as I can. Because I play a lot of bluegrass music, I've organized it here into instrumentals in A, in C, in G. Oftentimes I'll hyperlink tunes that I have trouble remembering or want to be able to reference. Sometimes I'll put in red tunes that were called recently that I learned at some point, but I need to work a little bit more on. So you see I have them organized in key by genre. If I'm playing with a banjo player that might not know many fiddle tunes, I have a bunch of the tunes that I know banjo players know that I can play on fiddle there. I've done the same thing for old time fiddle tunes, so you'll see I have a bunch of tunes in A that people play, a bunch of tunes in D that I know that people play, etc. Waltzes, and this can go on. You can make all sorts of different categories here. So I have some other hyperlinks and broad categories here that I could probably get a little bit more organized with, but I've made this list over years, just trying to get basically as a way to kind of socially connect with people to know what kind of tunes that people are most likely to play in different circles. So let's move to another Ashokan camp here. This is the Scottish String Fling, one I attended a few times, led by Alistair Fraser, Natalie Haas. Natalie, you may also know Natalie's sister, Brittany Haas, who plays bluegrass and old time as well. But this is a Scottish duo here that I've really enjoyed learning from. So I mentioned here there's a little clip of the sort of all-star team playing at the camp. This is Emerald Ray and Jay Unger here, Molly Mason. This is them playing a fun Scottish tune. So here I talk a little bit about how this music's related to bluegrass. You'll see that one of the tunes I played this week was Scotland. It was a tune that was written based on the the influences that Bill Monroe had of the Scottish and Irish fiddling world. So this is a tune that he wrote to kind of capture the sounds of bagpipes and those heavy dance floor tunes. Got a chance to play this at this camp with Jay and Molly, who many of you might know from their amazing kind of fiddle group, Fiddle Fever. And that was a group that was kind of dedicated to arranging really fun versions of fiddle tunes, compilations, and things like that. So definitely check out that group if you haven't heard of them. I mentioned a little bit how both genres influence each other, and how interpreters like Natalie Haas kind of incorporate this newer technique of the chop to create, really cool grooves to accompany traditional tunes and new tunes. So I mentioned some really awesome albums that I recommend listening to here. Be sure to check those out. This quartet here I heard about at Berkeley, that first camp I mentioned. It's a Juilliard trained string quartet that plays traditional music and organized in a string quartet fashion. So really cool. Some rhythmic takeaways I had from here. Let's see. I mentioned some of the patterns. Let's see what this one's here. Back. I'm going to go to the next bowing, which is the 3-3-2 bowing. So that rhythmic bowing and also pattern happens a lot in this tradition. I also mentioned a variation of that here. I took notes on 3 ways of accompanying the voice on fiddle. So you could use long tones, so double stops and long tones, and play over those. Some people will use shuffles, which is sort of the equivalent of strumming on a guitar and singing along. And you could also sort of mix chopping and shuffling as a way of varying how you accompany your voice. Took some notes on arranging. So double time and half time. Double time being and half time being. That's one way that you can kind of vary the rhythmic feel of a tune, and go back and forth between them. A lot of kind of more advanced, or I should say more modern fiddle players or approaches to arranging a fiddle tune. That's what you'll hear more often. Stop time is kind of this approach usually developed to back a bass solo or an instrument that needs a little help popping out of the texture. So it's a great way of kind of building back energy, kind of dropping out, and then building energy back. So I've got a video on stop time that I'll put in the description, talk about how to do that. It's usually when the instruments kind of just play one chord really sharp and short, while other instruments, maybe a bass solo, or it could be the fiddle part, kind of just gives an extra texture, and it helps to build back to the to say the B part that could be more energetic. So another arrangement strategy is throwing an intro or a hook with some sort of memorable bass line or syncopation. I mentioned here that the cello often in this group can take the role of a guitar or a piano. And I mentioned the group's Crooked Still here that didn't often have a guitar player. They had a cello and bass kind of laying down the groove that traditionally would be done by a guitar in other groups. Some tips here on learning and memorizing tunes quickly. Describe the shape or contour of the tune in sections. So that was a recommendation saying, this section kind of goes up to, say, the high A, or goes down to a low G, or it has a sort of shape where it starts high and then ends low. So sort of just describing sections of the tune by their contour. You can also help knowing the chords can help you outline the melody. And then this is really important, kind of anytime you learn a new tune or a new section, to review it every 3 or 4 hours, even if it's just for 5 minutes. That review on your instrument or just singing it and kind of hearing the recording that you had is a great way to kind of develop long-term, being able to kind of incorporate that melody or new tune into your long-term memory. Another tip I have here is connect licks and rhythms of new tunes So anything new you learn, try to connect it to something you already know. So an example here, the second lick of the A part has the same rhythm as the B part of Stony Lonesome. That was just an example of one way you might connect a new lick to an old tune. All right, so on to this next camp I attended. This is the Wernick Method Bluegrass Jam Camp at Silver Bay in New York. This one is where I really got to learn the ins and outs of bluegrass jamming. So one of the things I learned here is I discovered about this Bluegrass Jamming Favorites YouTube playlist. So this is a playlist that basically will go through all the most common bluegrass jam tunes. It's something that the Wernick Method puts up on YouTube. You can find this just by searching Bluegrass Jam Favorites. And I've often listened to this either actively practicing along with it or playing in the background just to develop a sense for what tunes are known within the bluegrass kind of jamming world, which are the tunes that people are most likely to call. So that's a great resource. Make sure to check that out. And there's also a songbook, a jam songbook, and a playlist associated with that. So the songbook was created for not only the Wernick Method, but also the JAM, Junior Appalachian Musicians program, which is a program that helps younger kids get into the music. It's a really good one that basically outlines songs. Let's see, I'll show you, zoom in here. It'll outline a song by, it'll give you some really good information. First of all, it'll use the number system rather than saying this song is in G or this song is in A. It'll help you transpose by using the number system, which helps people who have different vocal registers than the original vocal register that the song was recorded in, helps them to be able to sing the song. It underlines the words that have emphasis, so it helps you remember kind of the rhythm. I wish to the Lord that I never been born. You can see that. And it also has big, loud print so you can kind of easily read it from afar. And it highlights the chorus in bold so you can find that really easily. I think it's a great book for anyone who's looking to learn to jam in a bluegrass setting, help you to learn the standards quickly and be able to reference them and review them. So that one's pretty awesome. I mentioned this before. A really common pitfall of many other songbooks is that they're written in specific keys, which is okay for an instrument, right? Because all fiddles kind of can play in the same key. But if singing is a different story. Everybody has a different vocal register. So if you're trying to sing this in the same key that it was recorded, which was usually in bluegrass by high male tenor voices, if that doesn't kind of fit your voice, it'll be much harder to sing along or to learn that song. And oftentimes, people who have different registers just assume that they can't sing if they're not able to play out of the book that was, say the song is written in G. So it's a really great book to have in anyone's repertoire. I mentioned the online playlists and some of the advantages of the books here. Here's the jam program I mentioned before. And anyway, that's a great camp to check out as well. Silver Bay happens in the summer, and I believe he puts some else on around the country. So check out the Wernick Method in general, and you'll find he does camps, week-long camps, weekend camps, and classes all over the country. All right, so we're back to Ashokan here for Western and Swing Week. This is a fun one. I mentioned before, here's some of my notes from that camp. I mentioned before the stop time, the kind of how to accompany bass or percussion solos or even fiddle, and it looks like here's a link to my video on stop time. So I mentioned I'll put that in the back here, but I kind of mentioned what that looks like. You just kind of short little. All right, so you can check that video out on your own time if you're interested in that. And the chord progression in the video I have here, I wrote out, so if you want to play along. This happens a lot in swing music. You'll see if there's a bass solo happening. But like I said, you could also use it in an arrangement in a fiddle tune to kind of make the fiddle part pop in one of the sections. So some other recommendations here. I have some videos on accompanying in a swing style. So on fiddle or mandolin, you can use power chords or six and flat sevens, and all sorts of ways to kind of incorporate blues elements into the music. A little call and response practice if you're interested in absorbing some of the language here. I made a video that was based on some of the ways that Western and swing music was improvised. So this is kind of a workout from that perspective. And also, this is a common swing standard, Lady Be Good. And so I have a quick video here on how to learn that tune. It's one that I learned at one of these camps. And there's also some improvisation practice in there. So check that out. All right, we're on to Bluegrass Camp. So this is Bluegrass Camp at Ashokan as well. I think these are in the order I attended, so we'll get into some other camps that I attended from before as well. That's Tony Trishka on the banjo there. Here's some of the staff that was here this week. Tony Watt is really involved in the Boston bluegrass scene. Went to Eastern Connecticut State, ETSU, East Tennessee State University, to learn, Appalachian music studies. There's Missy Raines on the bass, and here's some of the other people who were teaching at the camp this year. Mike Bubb, bass player of just a super high in demand Nashville session bass player. Eli Gilbert you might recognize from his banjo channel on YouTube, and you'll see some fantastic singers and players here as well. So let's take a look at some of my notes from this camp. I mentioned that this is where I first learned about the Bluegrass Album Band, which is a second generation bluegrass group that covered a lot of the original standards. So people who are new to bluegrass music, who might not have the taste necessarily for early bluegrass, which I've come to absolutely love. Many people find it really easy to jump into Bluegrass Album Band, which is, like I said, a second generation, really well recorded, modern kind of approach to some of those standards. It was referred to me here when I was a student as the Bible of bluegrass. So a great way to learn the repertoire, because it's all that early bluegrass kind of recorded and captured in a modern way. One of the staff members put together a list. It looks like a Ashokan bluegrass listening guide here. So it looks like it's on YouTube. You can check that out here. Some great video and audio clips of some standard bluegrass tunes. And it looks like I took some freeform notes from this camp that I share here. So this is where I first learned standards, banjo standards like the Foggy Mountain Breakdown. A Clinch Mountain Backstep is Ralph Stanley, his instrumental on banjo. And then classic kickoffs like Your Love Is Like a Flower, which is a tune by Lester Flatt that's really common in the bluegrass jam world. And Bury Me Beneath a Willow, which is a Carter family tune that comes up a lot in jams. So let's take a look at the notes I took here. Like I mentioned, here's some songs that I learned. If I Lose, another standard by Ralph Stanley, the Stanley Brothers. Looks like I didn't know how to spell what I heard back there. All right, so iconic fiddle licks. Bury Me Beneath the Willow, that was that Carter family song I mentioned, very common in jams, came out a bunch. Salt Spring is an instrumental, modern instrumental. I believe John Reichman wrote that one. If I were to do this again, what I would do is add hyperlinks to all these little notes I took, so it would be easier to listen to them. So again, these are just my free form notes I took while I was there. Looks like I wrote down some tunes and some apps and some mandolins and some of the questions I had. This is Becky Buller, Fiddle Player of the Year for many, just a fantastic fiddle player. She has her own band, the Becky Buller Band, and it looks like I wrote down some important people to listen to. And Paul Warren, it looks like that's the first time I learned about his fiddle playing here. Foggy Mountain Breakdown I mentioned before. I think she taught a fiddle version of that. That's a great banjo tune, really common in the bluegrass jam world. And let's see. This one, it was a tune that she taught to teach some common licks. Clara Lynch, amazing singer, taught this great blues tune. If I were to have one blues tune in my repertoire, I would recommend it was this one. It's the Delmore Brothers singing "Blues Stay Away From Me," and it's just the melody's very simple, the lyrics are relatable. Great tune to check out. Other things that Becky Buller looks like she was talking about: Tony Rice, the amazing guitar player in the bluegrass genre here. Your Love Is Like a Flower. Looks like there's a book that Mel Bay produced that has how to play chords on the fiddle. This is looks like an exercise she put ba da 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 da, just to get comfortable playing in different keys. Some other notes here. Let's see. This looks like exercises for the bow. So the spider crawl you may have seen or heard of before. That's something you could YouTube. That's a lot of fiddle players use for their flexibility with their bow hand. And these are also for flexibility with the bow hand as well. Some warm-ups on the mandolin, up 4 notes at a time. It looks like ba da 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 da. Actually, I might be singing that's the arpeggios there. So I'm not sure exactly what that exercise was there. I'd have to take a little, maybe go back to my voice recordings there. All right, so some other things here, and some of the other teachers and people I met there I wrote down there. So that's a good look or example of what some of the notes that I took at these camps might look like. These are some awesome PDFs that describe the structure of bluegrass songs. So bluegrass song is usually a verse, chorus, and then after each chorus is where the solos happen. And usually that's repeated over and over again at a bluegrass jam. So the chorus is where people sing along, and then after that, 1 or 2 solos will happen, instrumental, improvised solos. The notes from the Claire Lynch's vocal class are here as well. What to do if a song begins with a chorus. Sometimes you go into a solo after that, or you can go into a verse and chorus and then follow this structure here. And again, these PDFs are all go into much more detail on each of these, so make sure to check them out. They're PDFs that I got from that camp. And then some of the things that you want to know going into a bluegrass jam here. So here's some of the past camps I went to, including my notes from them. So I've hyperlinked all these. They're on my website, which I'll link below. I think I mentioned Creative Strings Workshop being one that Christian Howes puts on. Here's some of the faculty. Alex Hargreaves, you might know, plays with Billy Strings now. Some of the other folks here, Andy Reiner and the Reiner family put on Fiddle Hell, that event I'll be talking about more in the future. So it looks like I just copied some of the notes here. Bluegrass chords often open so that the thirds, so the open meaning you play the root and the fifth and leave the third out. That's because bluegrass music is influenced by the blues, and the thirds is what defines in a chord is what defines whether it's major or minor. So leaving that chord open allows the singer or whoever's improvising to paint whether that particular lick or idea that they're singing is going to sound major or minor. You're giving them that option if you play your chords with no thirds in them. He also recommends an improvisatory practice where you switch back and forth between melody and 2 measures of improvisation. I believe that was Jason Anick, which he's really great at teaching all sorts of ways of thinking harmonically on the instrument. He plays a lot of gypsy jazz music and things like that. So I believe he was talking here where you kind of have a section looped where you play a portion of the melody and a portion of the improvisation. You could do this with fiddle tunes too, where you say you keep the first half or the second half of a fiddle tune the same and then improvise based on a quarter or a half of that tune. Oftentimes people improvise the last line of a fiddle tune. So let's take a look at some of my other notes from the Creative Strings Workshop. Again, these looks like exercises that you could do. This is a tune, a straight ahead jazz tune that Alex taught that week. Looks like some exercises here. Dominant, I think it was mentioning to say here. So this is, I think what I meant to put in shorthand here is that you can have the root, the seventh, and the third on mandolin or fiddle. If you play the root in the bottom, then the seventh and the third, it allows you to play a chord, a seven chord. And you can do that for major seven chords or dominant chords or minor chords or even flat five chords, or half diminished is another word for that. So let's see, other here. Looks like I took some notes on a really awesome Swedish polska that I learned there. Binswa, I guess is how you pronounce it, and that's how you spell it, supposedly. I know I have that hyperlinked in my repertoire here. So some other tunes I wrote down that I played in a fiddly jam. This is obviously a little bit all over the place. Cherokee Shuffle being a common bluegrass tune sitting on the dock of the bay. Obviously not within the realm of the fiddling, but a common, pop, hip hop, groovy kind of song. Spotted Pony is an old time tune. This is the first time I've heard this tune because I couldn't spell it, and I don't know if that might be right. I think that's closest how you spell it. That's an old time. It's sometimes done in bluegrass, different versions of it. Little Liza Jane, another old time tune. And let's see some of the other notes I took here. The importance of practicing in all 12 keys. Learning pop tunes by ear as a mean to improving your ability to improve your ear. So things starting with simple pop tunes rather than more advanced kind of solos, transcribing solos. He had a really cool chord chart. It was just basically random notes in a pattern, and he played little games where he's like, every time you see A, you're going to play like a pentatonic pattern, and you kind of go through the chart. It's a pretty neat thing. Maybe I'll hyperlink that below. Let's see, anything else here that jumps out to me? Common chord progressions. Jason Anik recommends kind of playing both chord tones and the bass line regardless of what instrument you're playing, even if you're not a bass. You're using Drum Machine. That's a great app. High quality backing tracks, basically. Basically it's an infinitely repeating, professionally recorded drum track. So often I'll put that on instead of a metronome to get some of the feel for the music, like a swung beat versus a straight kind of country beat. So I definitely use that app a lot. Let's see what else here. Trying to write down the feel of some of the music here. Nicole Yarling is an amazing singer and violinist who talked about going through the cycle of fifths or the circle of fourths and putting the same lick through all those. That's a cool little exercise that I learned there. The three-peat is a common ending in funk or jazz music where you repeat the last line 3 times. Usually the third time is longer. Like, on the sunny side of the street, on the sunny side of the street, on the sunny side of the street. Bad example, but that hopefully you get the idea there. That's kind of common in jazz tunes. All right, so Andy Reiner I mentioned before, running Fiddle Hell, and I think I copied and pasted these 2 quotes of his. All right, some other notes here. Looks like this is an exercise Jason Anik talks about here. It's an arpeggio exercise where you switch through the keys. So it's bum, 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 and then down in the next key. Bum 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 bum. That's what that one sounds like. Good way to get yourself to practice playing in all 12 keys. You can do that in minor too. I don't know if I could sing that. Let's see. Bum 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 bum, etc. And you could do that starting on the third to practice inversions and things like that too. Let's see if this is another exercise. Ba da da dum da 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 dum. That's a kind of a pentatonic-y sort of thing here. Talking about chunking practice so practicing instead of practicing improvising over a whole song, you can practice over specific sections. And what makes that really easy is the amazing, no, not the amazing slowdowner. I'm thinking about there's an app called iReal Pro, and you can highlight specific measures of the song and have it repeat just like one chord change that you're having trouble practicing over. It's a really good way to dig in closer with your practice. All right, so let's see. Dominant chords I talk a little bit about here. That's that bum 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 bum. It's a root major third fifth flat seven. Talk about some different ways of using those. Oh, this is a great idea that I got from him. He said improvisers, when they're thinking about playing over chords, they're thinking about portions of the fingerboard lighting up. So for example, if they're thinking about pentatonic minor or a blues scale, they'll see all the notes of the blues scale just lit up across the fingerboard of the instrument. I actually have been working on developing that on my own. Let's see if I can pull those up for you. This would be an example of that, where you have the fingerboard, rather than thinking in traditional notation, you have the fingerboard lit up, so the notes of the minor pentatonic or the notes of the blues scale lit up. And I'm working on, I have these on my website now for minor pentatonic. I'm working on putting this in what's called extended range, where you have all the different notes across the fingerboard lighting up across one position, so first position or third position, etc. So that's an idea I think that got sparked from my time at the Creative Strings workshop. Let's see if there's any other takeaways from here. Feel free to look at these at your own pace, of course. I think this is the first time I noticed that the language that I kind of learned in college, half diminished, is the same as the language that jazz players use, minor 7 flat 5. So that was the first time I learned that. I was very excited about it seems here. I think I also learned that some different ways of playing, this scale. It says you could play, I guess, over a 4 or a 5 chord in a minor key. Let's see here. Learn some jazz standards here. Body and Soul, Joella. A little bit on how to harmonize. You can go to third, the fifth, or the seventh down. He talked about as I think he was talking about how in a big band the horn section would divide up a melody. They would go by a third above, a fifth above, and a seventh down, and that would create a nice thick harmony. Looks like I wrote down some of the people and the tunes that I met there. So let's take a look at the next one here. I mentioned the String Symposium. So here are some of the big takeaways. Again, I have hyperlinked notes here, but I'll just talk you through some of the cool things I learned. Jeremy Kittle is just this amazing, all-around player, Scottish, jazz, classical. He does it all. And he mentioned isolating specific fiddle bowings and drilling them as you would a scale or a lick. That's where I got my idea for that video here, where I talk about common bluegrass or common country bluegrass old time fiddle bowings, kind of drilling those as you would scales. So let's see, reharmonize. Oh, he talks about this is a cool thing I learned in Irish and Scottish music. Instead of playing the same chords over and over again, if you have a jig or something in a minor key, it sounds really cool to replace that one chord with a flat 6 chord, which shares two of the same notes, but that the root of the flat 6 makes the melody sound a lot cooler. So definitely try that out on your own time. If you had a simple tune like Swallowtail Jig, normally we go so what you could do is replace that one chord, the minor chord, with that flat 6, which would be a C in this case. So you have that one particular moment there that really kind of brightens up, and it changes the feeling of the song in a pretty neat way. All right, other things I learned from Jeremy Kittle here. It looks like chopping and singing, a legitimate solo option. So I think that he might have been scat singing and chopping at the same time. Martha Mook, who runs the multi-style string symposium here, was talking about pedals, and so how you could use GarageBand, Logic, or MainStage all as ways of replacing pedal boards. So there's actually, instead of buying a bunch of pedals, you can use these programs. If you plug your instrument into a computer, there's a way to use these programs instead of pedal boards, and to go directly, basically interface your computer with an amplifier. And then instead of buying 1,000 amps, you could just use these programs that are already on your computer. Pretty neat that I remember discovering that there, thinking, that's a lot better than having to lug around 30 pedals and spend hundreds of dollars on them. So let's see. Another thing I discovered here is the Line 6 is the wireless transmitter is the way to go. It's the great way if you want to eliminate cables. That is the one you want to buy. I actually got it after that camp, and I love it myself. If you plan on using a instrument that you want more freedom to walk around with, it's a great way to solve that problem. I knew I was eating up cables walking around and twisting them up and things like that over time. So Dave Egger, a really amazing cellist who lives in Tennessee, he was talking about how when you communicate to singer-songwriters or dance artists, they're not familiar with a lot of the terms that we might be familiar with if you've studied music, or even the terms that you might use like pizzicato versus bow. So he said when you're communicating with these people, instead of using these musician terms, communicate using emotions, or demonstrate what you do. You want it like this, and you bow something, and then, or do you want it like this? You pluck something, because they're not going to be familiar. Most of them are not going to be familiar with those terms. I was here that I heard kind of fiddle tunes with drums. A really cool opportunity to kind of expand your opportunities, or way of expanding your opportunities as a musician is experiment playing fiddle tunes under different drum grooves, or just try playing a fiddle tune with a drummer. If you don't know what to play together, just play a tune and have them play along. Can really make the tune lively in a different way. He was really open to genre bending and things like that, so he talked about never closing yourself off to listening to different music and being able to pull from different genres freely. He also talked about imitating singers with the bow, so adjusting your bow speed to the amount of breath that a singer might use. Pretty neat. Regina Carter, another amazing singer, violinist, was really big on singing along with solos, singing along with your passive listening while you're doing dishes or laundry. And she was saying how you don't necessarily need to know all these complex harmonies in order to improvise. Start by singing. That was her recommendation. And always have your ear ahead of your instrument. She also talked about getting the style of jazz to imitate the sound of a horn, to play really hard into the string. So a lot of bow pressure. slightly more loose bow hair, and you're trying to imitate either horns or the voice when you're playing in that genre. Talked about the importance of being conversational, so playing like you talk, or practice, saying something or singing something and then bowing it at the same time and having it sort of match. And another strategy here: improvise the melody, or improvising words and melody over a blues simple chord progression. Excellent way of practicing in that setting there. So again, these are just some big takeaways. You can feel free to check out the full-on notes here that I took from that symposium. I know that happens once a year as well. All right, the next one here, Creative Strings Workshop Online. So I wrote here, Christian Howes, who runs this is one of the big takeaways I had, is always record yourself and make judgments about your musical idea separate from your execution of them. So for example, ask yourself, okay, I could hear what I was trying to do, and separating, okay, so I might have to work on my shifting, but I could see that I'm hearing this idea, etc., etc. Christian Howes is just big in general on recording yourself, and he's one of the people that got me into recording live performances, or even times where I'm in a jam and then listening to that on the way home as a means of practice. There's a lot of things you can learn from just removing extra stuff that you're putting in your playing that doesn't need to be there. Here's some of my notes from Creative Strings Online. You'll see this is really free form, and I think I was a teenager when I was taking these notes. So we'll see here how these are, if I can translate any of these for you. Actually, you know what? This is Creative Strings Online. So I took this more recently, the Creative Strings workshop in person. I might have linked the notes there separately. This is one I have actually tons of notes from. Let's see if there's any takeaways here I could share with you. Christian Howes is big on using loops, whether that's your own loops using a loop pedal or loops on a backing track. Practicing over those can be really helpful way to work on your improvisation. So some tips on let's see here. Thinking about different forms to practice over. So, making sure you can play over a 12-bar blues in different keys. Also recognizing that 32-bar, that's another form that you want to practice. So rhythm changes, a common chord progression, and things like that you want to get in different keys. And sort of, he's big on when people want to get better at playing. He asks them, well, what in particular do you want to get better at? Because you might be really comfortable playing over a standard kind of swing tune, but you might not be able to be as expressive over a ballad. So he talks about being clear with your goals. It looks like here he's talking about triad pairs. So instead of practicing over whole chord progressions, to pick just going from one chord to another chord. Practicing, for example, going from a 2 to a 5 chord, just that chord change, and then maybe from the 5 to the 1. Kind of isolating specific chord changes, especially when they're challenging. This is where I first learned about enclosures, which is where you basically are playing an arpeggio but playing notes around it. So it'd be like, if our arpeggio is bum bum bum, if we're going to go do an enclosure around one of those notes, it'd be ba-da-dum, or ba-da-dum, or ba-da-dum. If we put a bunch of them in a row, be-doo-doo, ba-doo-da-dee, boo-dee, bop. All of a sudden it starts to be a lick that you can sort of use. He mentioned some common jazz players here: Joe Venuti, Eddie Lang, and Stefan Grappelli. Check if you're looking into getting to that type of music, make sure to check out, do some listening to these three. They're staples in the jazz violin world. All right, some other recommendations for listening in those notes here. All right, so we're on to Fiddle Hell here. So some things I took from one of my experiences at Fiddle Hell. bluegrass jamming tips from Tony Watt and Laura Orshaw. So I'll just read these to you here. Solos often start from start to the left of whoever kicks the song off. So kicks the song off would be the first solo. The second, they're saying basically the direction of solos sometimes. It's good to give everybody a chance to take a solo on a song. It's kind of an etiquette thing. If you do not plan to take a solo or take a shot at a break, then it's good to kind of ahead of time just whisper to the person next to you so that when the lead singer offers the solo to you, that the person next to you knows that you're not going to take it, and then they can jump in so it doesn't kind of make the lead singer kind of nervous or anything in a jam situation. This is a tradition. Oftentimes the person who takes the first solo also takes the last solo. I wrote here, the orphan chorus or the lonely chorus is the chorus without a verse. That's an indication that the song's going to end. Lead singer should look up at the end of every chorus, and also the people in the jam you want to look up, because the lead singer is going to look to the person who's going to take the next solo. And often repeating the last line or two lines of the song is common to end a bluegrass jam, and a song in a bluegrass jam. Andy Reiner just recommended kind of learning solos from people who don't play your instrument, kind of expand your boundaries here. And Rob Flax recommended this book that I read, I love, called The Primacy of the Ear. It's a book that is about how we learn melodies, how the brain kind of gets melodies deeper into the long-term memory. So there's a lot of strategies there that I use every day today. Things like reviewing the melody at certain different portions during the day, so morning, middle of the day, and night, and listening to the melody, trying to sing the melody along with the recording, and then trying to sing the melody separate from the recording to kind of test what you know and all that sort of thing. So check out, I love that book. I think it's fantastic. And it looks like I took some notes from Fiddle Hell here. Let's see if there's anything I can pick out here that jumps out to me. There's that book I mentioned again. Some ideas from Jason Anik. Fast vibrato towards the end of the note. That's kind of imitating a trumpet player or horn players. Dark Eyes is a common tune in the gypsy jazz music world. I think I copied and pasted those bluegrass jam tips here. Again, these are just sort of free-form notes that I've taken. I'll see if there's anything in here that I think jump out. I remember learning about Richard Green for the first time here, who was one of the original bluegrass fiddle players who started this chop as a technique that became more common later in the genre. This is a little bit of how that kind of developed here over time. And these are notes on the feel for different time signatures. Common tunes in the bluegrass world here. Old Dangerfield is a great jam tune that Bill Monroe wrote. So it's originally for mandolin, but it works great for lots of different instruments. And some other tunes there that I learned. A couple more here. Let's take a look at Daryl Enger. He put on I did his artist work series online, and so it looks like I took some notes from there. One of the ones I copied and pasted here are playing double stops over the chords and focusing on just two strings at a time. So in my online classes, I have my students practice that often together. So looks like the little things I've learned from my lessons over time. So the first lesson was learn the melody first, then harmonize the melody. I remember he talked about harmonizing it above and below, just like a singer would, but doing that on your instrument. And then kind of using using the melody and the harmonizations of the melody to improvise. So you're using combinations of those different things to follow loosely when you take a break or a solo. That's the strategy I just mentioned before. Some people he recommended for me to listen to, it looks like. Talks about how to respond to a singer. Looks like I've been spelling things wrong here too. These, again, free form notes here. I just wanted to share with these to show you some of the things that you might learn in these places, and maybe some ways that you can help kind of help you to process some of those things that you're learning at camps as well. All right, so Creative Strings Workshop that I mentioned, Christian Howes runs. So he talks, this is where I learned about the fact that there are two blues scales. There's a minor blues scale and a major blues scale, and people who are playing the blues are often switching between these two scales here. So you'll see on my, in my other videos, there are many times where I demonstrate kind of how you can use those two things here. So it looks, I believe I took some pretty good notes here. Here's some patterns to practice. Bum, 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. That's a little pattern that he gave me to work diatonically, so to really understand a key is to go through that pattern there. You could do the reverse. Dun 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 dun, etc., etc. And you could, that's in major, what I was singing. You can do that in melodic minor. I wrote here as well, and in different tonalities. You could do mixolydian and things like that. So some other free form notes here. Over a dominant 7 chord, I realized here he talked about you can play a diminished arpeggio. So if you start on the flat 2, so say over a D chord, you could play, start on an E flat and then just play a diminished arpeggio. You get E flat, let's see. Yeah, so actually, so yeah, you could get C, E flat, F sharp, A. Yeah, so actually, I guess it would be easier to think about over a dominant 7 chord, you could play a diminished arpeggio starting on a whole step beneath it. So then you get C, which is a part of the D7 chord, a E flat, which ends up being what's called a flat 9, F sharp, which is the 3rd, and then the A, which is the 5th. So it's just one kind of more one note of extra color that you're adding to that. Looks like some other strategies I learned from here. Talking about adding and subtracting sharps or flats to change from one mode to the next to get a good sense for what that feels like. And more notes on that, the difference between those two blues scales there. So those are some of my notes from 2019 at Creative Strings Workshop. Strings Without Boundaries. Let's see here. Jeremy Kittle talking about the blues notes are basically the space in between the 6th and the flat 7, and then the 2 and the flat 3. So the space in between those are the really darker, kind of bluesier sounds. Different ways to make make yourself sound like a train. Playing the 5th and the 7th together, or the 3rd and the 5th. Even the 7th and the 4th is another one I put there. And then single shuffle, dooga jugga, dooga jugga, dooga jugga. That's what I have in my video here. I talk about this simple shuffle, or simple or single shuffle. Then double shuffle. do do da 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 do 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 da 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 do. So that's what you hear in the Orange Blossom special there. That's the bowing there. All right, so I learned here from Jeremy Kittle that you can kind of switch to the minor blues scale over the 5 chord. That's a pretty neat idea that you could do. I see that done a lot in bluegrass music. Some other ideas here. Gypsy jazz from Dwayne. He's talking about how gypsy jazz is sort of American jazz music, which was a big band. When that recorded music, made its way to Europe, you had folks reimagining that music on string instruments, which became a genre of its own, where that focused on usually 2 guitars, upright bass, and violin as their kind of main instruments. So David Wallace here, who teaches at Berkeley, talks about transcribing at lower speeds is really important. I remember when I learned that, every time I transcribe anything, I'm always at 60% or lower speed when I'm trying to learn it. So I really get the intricacies of the melody. He says if you want to get better as a rock instrumentalist, you should learn the top 10 rock solos of all time. So just search the top 10 guitar riffs and learn those on fiddle. So those are the big takeaways. Let's see if there's any others in my notes here that we could talk about. I remember learning, to play in the blues. I was recommended that you listen to real blues players, so people that not necessarily, violin or mandolin or any of these kind of traditional instruments, not often as used. So making sure that we listen to kind of some of the originators of the music to get that language in our fingers and in our head. All right, so some other notes on train sounds here, some Scottish airs, Neil Gow's Lament, and some reels. It looks like I took a class here on East Tennessee fiddle tunes here, so there's some ones to learn there. Some little bit more advanced playing over chord changes here. I mentioned this before. That's the idea of playing a diminished arpeggio. Copied some of this. Katie Glassman's a really fun Texas swing, kind of traditional fiddle competition kind of style player. And she recommended some really awesome people to listen to that fit that kind of fit that sort of style there. She also has a kind of a school online where she teaches some of those breaks. So this person is talking about The Talent Code. That's a great book. Highly recommend. It's talking about how some of the greatest musicians were people that just spent an incredible amount of time. And that is true across any extremely successful musician, athlete. They kind of look across different places in the world and find that that's the commonalities between people that we consider tremendously talented. So I really enjoyed reading that book. I'd love to read it again sometime. Some techniques for playing rock music here. I was asking about some questions about electronic instruments and cables and things like that. Wrote down some of the common pieces of technology that are used. All right, some Scottish reels. I look like I wrote down here. This is a great beginner gypsy jazz tune if you haven't learned that. And check out Nat King Cole singing that tune. That would be a great place to start. Simple chord changes. So again, feel free to take a look at these on your own. Just kind of scanning through to see if anything jumps out that I want to share with you. This is a lot of great information about contest fiddling, which is something that doesn't happen too much in the Northeast. So it's really neat to learn about that and some of the successful players within that genre. And in a lot of these camps, you'll see there is non-instrument specific classes that you can take as well, like jazz improvisation, learning from different instruments, how to make music videos and get gigs and things like that. So there's something for everybody in a lot of these camps. All right, looks like the last one I have here in my notes is the Berkeley Mark O'Connor Summer String Camp, and that is the first camp I ever went to. I believe the notes I have here again are from when I was a teenager, so who knows how organized they'll be here. Again, they're just kind of free form notes here. I'll talk through some of them. This is where I met Billy Contreras and Jason Anik, and they gave an awesome summary of kind of jazz music as it's evolved over time, starting with the blues and sort of a mix of African rhythm and 20th century, so Western harmony and things like that. Generally, we have these three big subgenres of jazz: swing, bebop being sort of the next developed subgenre of it, and then modern jazz. And talked about kind of swing era. This common feel was junk, 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 junk on the guitar there. Bass was less arpeggiated, sometimes still playing just the root and the fifth. And then common chord progressions from folk music like 4-5-1. So bum 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 became 2-5-1. Bum bum bum. So not only were 4 chords kind of replaced with 2 chords to have a little bit more color with them, but also a lot of these chords became 7th chords, and that kind of thickened up the harmony and the potential for improvisation and creative expression. So the 30s or 40s and 50s, where bebop kind of developed, that's where things got faster. It was originally, swing music was dance music, and musicians would, in a swing band, would be playing on a cruise ship, for example. Every night they'd play the same tunes for the dancers, and at the end of the night they'd be bored with playing the same tunes, so the musicians would get together and kind of play their own music. It became a musician's music. It was more virtuosic, quick, faster than typical dance songs. And this is also where they said trading started, so going back and forth between musicians. And usually the head or the melody of the tune was much shorter, and most of the way that people would play would be free improvisation over that smaller section of music. So here Jeremy Kittle's talking about Celtic fiddling, how important getting the feel is, and often how that's not able to be notated properly, so the importance of listening and singing along. For centuries and centuries, when people didn't have recordings, they were passed on through vocalizations. And often music was a hobby for people, so while they're at work, they'd sing these tunes or pass them to people. Casey Dreesen talked about the history of chopping, so that it's actually a young technique, or it's not a very old technique on the instrument. And I think I mentioned before Richard Green sort of being the person who started that, because Bill Monroe asked him to kind of play rhythmically. And he did that so often he was getting lazy with the kind of technique, which was originally just kind of throwing the bow down, as a way of passing time. But it eventually kind of got codified and used in a more advanced way by all sorts of players, Darrell Enger included, and even notated in groups like the Turtle Island String Quartet. So here's some tips on how to chop, which I have some other videos on, and there's all sorts of videos on YouTube. But it looks here, it says make sure the bottom 4 inches of your bow, which you don't use to bow melody all the time, make sure that's real rosined, because it's important that you get grip on that with a good chop. Turning the hair away from you, allowing gravity to help you not hurt, not pressing on the bow, but kind of dropping it into the string at the right angle. And this is just kind of ways of positioning your hand to make sure it gets a clean chop. Different places to chop on the fingerboard to get different sounds. And then Casey Dreesen's really known for his triplet chop. So he has his way of skipping the bow and making it sound pretty neat. So yeah, and then other notes on this is where I believe I met Bruce Molsky for the first time, talking about old time music and how to sing and play at the same time. So again, lots and lots of notes here that you can check out on your own time. Let's see if anything jumps out to me here. I believe I talked about kind of the history of jazz music. And yep, so Daniel Carwile, excellent, again, Texas style fiddle player here. Talked about Benny Thomason, really famous player within that genre, and some other important people here. Mark O'Connor's background, how he's studied with Stefan Grappelli. Not grape. Some misspellings here. Yeah. And then, yeah, I remember at this time, I was a teenager at the time. I actually did not even know who Mark O'Connor was. So I remember going to get coffee with him at a Starbucks, just kind of hanging out, having no idea what, what a player he was. And we talked through our thoughts on music education here. Martin Hayes is an unbelievable Irish player. And he had some awesome things to share here. Talked about Irish bowing, how it's sort of different. Focusing on tone, 5 minutes a day. Importance of internalizing melodies before you play them on the instrument. That means being able to sing it. Jeremy Kittle taught yesterday the common Beatles tune. He was teaching how to chop over that tune, chop and sing at the same time. Tracy Silverman teaches at Belmont University. That's when I first met him. He's famous for his kind of strum bowing method. So playing the instrument like a guitar, thinking of the fiddle like a guitarist would, where you're playing rhythmically. Some great Cape Breton fiddle players to listen to here. Natalie McMaster. And yep, all sorts of other tips and tunes and things like that. So anyway, I just want to encourage you to check out some of these camps. Check out camps that are in your area. Take good notes and let me know what you think of them. Thanks so much for listening.